Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of December 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well, the weather. The weather is very mixed. Apparently, Perthshire is sunny at the moment, and it's also sunny in Norfolk, which is excellent. So I'll just say a little hello to Mr. Gerrish, the violin maker. Whereas Manchester is pretty dull. So we're feeling sorry about that, but we've got the same sort of weather here in Plymouth. Not too good. Now, as somebody has said very astutely in the UK column chat room, it clearly is not a day when Parliament will be debating child abuse because, of course, people are animated and turning up. There's the opportunity for war.
House of Commons is full. And as we know, when they debate child abuse, there are, 5 people there normally?
5 or 6. Not an important subject, the abuse of Britain's children, but war, let's go for it.
Let's go for it. Well, I thought we would start today just running through today's front pages. We don't often do this, but I thought we should. So let's start off with the Daily Star. I didn't even bother with the Sun, but let's start off with the Daily Star. The most important thing today is Georgie's naked jungle romps. Well, Daily Express getting a little more serious, but still not really talking about, I don't see anything on there about Syria at all, how you can beat diabetes. We've got the Mirror talking about organ transplants. We've got George Osborne talking about migration being a boost to the economy.
Yep, well done, George.
Yep, and then we start to get into the broadsheets, as they're colloquially known, and battle lines drawn on Syria vote. That's a reasonably sort of middle of the road kind of front page. The Independent, Britain on the verge of entering a conflict in Syria, pretty middle of the road as well. The I newspaper, which of course is a subset of the Independent, talking about the PM's war strategy being under fire, and we started to see a little bit of the tension beginning to build last night on the Cameron side of the fence. The Times saying less than half of voters back airstrikes, so this seems to contradict a lot of the polls that Cameron was pushing forward, but nonetheless that may be adding to the tension. Of course, although the BBC doesn't do a front page as such, I thought it was worth mentioning the BBC, and I particularly wanted to mention Craig Murray's comments about the BBC, because he was talking about Craig Murray, of course, former British ambassador. He was talking about the comments that Michael Fallon was making on the Andrew Marr programme on Sunday, but I mean, of course, this Tuesday, but this Wednesday, but nonetheless, you look at the BBC's coverage, and this comment doesn't really surprise you, because Craig Murray said, "I think you can measure the death of democracy by the sheer audacity of the propaganda that government can get away with." Michael Fallon today on the Marr programme churned out the 70,000 moderate rebels lie with a smooth, bland face, and mentioned only the Free Syrian Army when pressed on who they were exactly. This is dishonesty on an epic scale, but the really breathtaking one was to follow. Fallon claimed that the UK had killed hundreds of ISIL militants by bombing in Iraq, causing not one single civilian casualty. This risible claim had appeared in the Daily Mail last week, which is to be expected, but that a government minister can state such an absolutely ludicrous lie before a major BBC journalist without being seriously pushed on the matter really does say a great deal about what kind of democracy the UK is in now. So that really sums up the media coverage of the whole thing, I would say. Daily Telegraph, this is where we started to see Cameron throw his toys out the pram.
He's clearly a worried man, Mike, isn't
Yes.
he? Cameron is worried he's not going to be able to do as his masters are telling him.
Well, indeed. So he's busy calling people that agree with Corbyn terrorist sympathisers. But this article in the Telegraph really did it for me. Jeremy Corbyn's Syria pacifism means waving the white flag to child-ripping mass murderers. And this journalist goes on to say, to stand by while the venomous thugs of Islamic State slaughter thousands of innocent people is not virtuous but deeply immoral. Because as our MPs vote on whether Britain should join our allies in bombing ISIL in Syria, it is time for us to all pick a side. So we've got to pick sides, and really pretty amazing rhetoric from the Telegraph.
Well, I think maybe it would be good to do a little bit of research into Julia Hartley Brewer, who's the journalist who wrote that article. to see how many articles she's written on child rape in Britain, how many articles she's written about the British government covering up the rape of children in children's homes. So there we are. Her name is Julia Hartley Brewer. Perhaps you might like to have a look at LinkedIn and Facebook and all the usual places to see what this lady's real agenda is and possibly who's paying her.
Yes. Now, of course, how do we deal with this? One way is to actually tell people what you think if they're going to vote on a subject. And I wrote this little blog post on my Facebook page yesterday and also pushed it out on the UK column mailing list. Not really sure what kind of response I was going to get to it, but I have to say that the response has been overwhelmingly positive. And whereas our email newsletters don't always generate a huge amount of response, this one has, and we'll come on to that in a second. 21st Century Wire here have published the letter that they were sending to their respective MPs, and do encourage everybody to go and have a look at that, because as usual with Patrick and his team, there's some specific information in there which should be of interest to people. But we have had some email responses from people talking about what they sent to their MPs.
Yeah, exactly, Mike. Well, we had quite a few. We've just brought up 3 here as an example. So for our listeners, we'll actually read these through. Let's have a look at this first one here. This was sent to the Stephen Phillips, the MP for Sleaford and North Hykeham. Once again, for the record, I do not consent to the belligerent government voting in favour of bombing Syria. This is not just an extension of bombing ISIS in Iraq. As Parliament is saying, it's an outright act of war against Syria, one which the Russians are well aware of, hence why they are already there to defend their ally against whomever, including NATO. Why is it that according to NATO, Turkey is well within its rights to defend its sovereign airspace, but it's okay for Britain, France, America, etc. to enter Syrian skies and blow up targets? As MPs are supposed to serve their constituents and not a hidden agenda, you can only vote against any escalation in Syria. Airstrikes will only make peace in the region and the world an impossible task and could quite possibly lead towards the unthinkable. So that was a very good email. I think it has got all of the key points in there. This is the one I sent to my MP, Tory Mr. Streeter, of course a great Christian, so he says, "Dear Mr. Streeter, some time ago when I asked you to find out in what capacity, official or private, your now utterly disgraced Tory colleague Brooks Newmark MP was promising General Idris of the Free Syria Army, an organisation linked to both Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra terrorists. He was promising that British bombs and bullets would soon be raining down on Assad, and you failed to act. Instead, you told me that things had moved on in Syria and you did nothing. But so they have, as we now see Prime Minister David Cameron driving for yet more unlawful military action against a sovereign state. His great lie is that this action is required to stop terrorism, yet the British and US governments have been supporting the moderate terrorists with both funds and supplies. In addition, all widely published evidence of the support given to these terrorists by Turkey is ignored, as is their export of ISIS oil. Of course, Cameron's real agenda is and always was regime change and the removal of Assad. You claim to be a Christian, and I understand you chaired the Conservative Christian Association. If that is true, I ask, will the blood of yet more innocent Syrian men, women and children be on your Christian hands as they die in UK airstrikes? As a constituent, I require you to vote against any military action against Syria and the Syrian people. Yours sincerely." And we have another one here. "Good morning, Holly Lynch. This is the Labour MP for Halifax. Thank you for your reply. I would also like to have a say regarding the recent actions in Syria and the bombing that David Cameron is so intent on doing, leading us to another illegal world war. As you are the MP for my town of Halifax and my representative, my voice in Parliament, I would like you to put aside your personal feelings about whether it is right or wrong to bomb innocent people in another country, and on my behalf say that you do not want the UK to send bombs over to Syria. This is my choice and my voice as one of your constituents, and I believe that as my representative, You have to voice my concern or the majority of Halifax concerns. When the results come about as to your decision to vote either for or against bombing in Syria, I will look forward to hearing of your choice and the reason why you made this decision. So we know that a lot of people have been sending these sorts of emails. This was the sort of material that had the right effect and stopped David Cameron's warmongering in its tracks last time. Can we hope, Mike, that perhaps there's been enough movement by people to do the same this time?
Well, time will tell. We don't have to wait too long, I suppose. Now, last week we covered Bill Engdahl's coverage of the allegation that an Israeli military man had been caught amongst ISIS fighters in Syria. And today, Yahoo News here reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu, has admitted for the first time that Israeli forces have been operating in Syria. Of course, they're using Iran as the excuse for this. Because they're saying that Syria is an Iran-backed regime. They're determined to take the fight to Iran, and so they are doing that using Syria as a proxy in the meantime. Netanyahu said, we occasionally carry out operations in Syria to prevent that country from becoming a front against us. So this isn't self-defense.
No, this is Israeli policy.
So we're looking at Greater Israel policy here. And another interesting little comment from Netanyahu posted on this website, and I have to thank Vanessa Bailey for this. He's envisioning, according to this interview, 3 more Israels in the Middle East and North Africa. So I'll just read what it says here, outlining his vision for countering Iranian conventional threat. The Prime Minister curiously suggests Israel's near Afghanistan, Libya and Yemen. And so at the 33-minute mark in this interview, he asked his audience, imagine a Middle East without Israel. What do you think would happen in our immediate vicinity? See, this is quite interesting because Netanyahu's the Prime Minister, but he's also the Foreign Minister. So he's got 2 jobs. So he said, I'm the Foreign Minister, so I have to be diplomatic. He said, I'll leave it to your imagination. Now imagine a Middle East with 3 Israels, 1 in Afghanistan, 1 in Libya and 1 in Yemen. It will be. It's not it would be, it's it will be. It will be a far different situation. So I find that a fascinating little article and a fascinating interview.
And this is one of the topics that clearly isn't being put into the mainstream press and media as to what the Israeli position is, but clearly they are anti-Syria. There is no doubt about that. We've had British ambassadors going for special meetings with Israel. Over recent months, we've had senior British military men going for meetings with Israel. Declaration of Israeli policy is removal of Assad. Let's have a look at this breakdown. This is from the Telegraph and Politics Today. It's a sort of early look on what's in the political news. They're coming up with the fact that knives are being drawn now in Westminster. Parliamentary approval still relies on the numbers being there, with Labour MPs coming under immense pressure not to back airstrikes. But it says many have been left in tears by hard left activists. They've been reported they'll be murdering women and babies. And one MP, Peter Carl, says that he was sent a picture of a dead baby in the post. So the implication from this is anybody who feels strongly about the war is a horrible left-wing terrorist that's going to make people cry. Freudian slip there. I think I said terrorist. I meant extremist. The Labour leader has in turn tried to intimidate pro-intervention MPs by warning that they'll have no hiding place if they support strikes. And this is the real one. This is Cameron. You don't want to walk through the lobbies with Jeremy Corbyn and a bunch of terrorist sympathisers. This is David Cameron beginning to destabilise, surely, Mike.
Yeah, well, he was asked to apologise for that at the beginning of the discussions in the House of Commons today, and he refused to do that. But he told MPs there was honour in voting both for and against, apparently. And so there you go.
But a lot of people unhappy with that. Well, we're just going to remind people at the top of where this agenda was coming from. This is Brooks Newmark in the Times of Israel, clearly saying we need to arm the rebels or risk genocide. the British Jewish MP pleads. So we're not sure where Brooks Newmark's loyalty was when he visited General Idris on the Turkish border, promising that there'd be bombs and missiles raining down on Assad. Was this pro-Israel policy? Absolutely. We've also got to remind people, of course, that it was David Cameron in 2011 said his belief in Israel is unshakable. What is David Cameron now putting into place? A pro-Israeli attack on Syria, it would appear.
Yeah.
If you don't agree with it, you're in for trouble.
Sky News this morning highlighting that police are changing their tactics. There'll be no more negotiation when it comes to issues where they think there's a possibility of people's lives being at risk. No more negotiations. Basically, what's being highlighted here is a shoot-to-kill policy, Brian, and they clearly determined to make use of this new equipment that they're getting hold of.
You don't want to actually arrest anybody, Mike, because that might lead to a trial and publicity, and then the truth would come out. What you need is anybody that you, David Cameron, designate as a terrorist, you need them shot dead. And then, of course, you just carry on the story. Person was a terrorist. Drone strike, person's dead. Of course, they were dead men tell no tales. So this is the agenda to ensure that the propaganda works. We picked up on this particular story from the Mail here, which said that terror on the streets of London, chilling footage shows Met firearms officers take on gunmen. This is a very interesting headline here. Let's have a look at it. It says that the officers were going to take on gunmen in a training exercise against ISIS extremists. So gunmen, we don't know whether this was a Freudian slip by the Mail that actually meant government or whether that was an extra T. It's an interesting one.
Must be gunmen.
Must be gunmen. Well, let's follow it through. We just thought we'd like to point out this little subtlety because, of course, here is the debased national flag. So this isn't the British flag. This is something different. We think this is a nudge towards a uniform for the EU-wide paramilitary police who are clearly being brought in on the back of every and any terrorist incident.
Well, it's interesting that uniform is blue, if you can call it a uniform. And if you remember when we took our trip down to Spain, Brian, that was the colour of the Spanish militarised police on the border.
Who were fully armed and wearing balaclavas over their faces, and they were stopping random stop and search of cars going through the French-Spanish border.
But we've got to remember that the photographs that were taken at Wembley Stadium a couple of weeks ago, the blue uniforms had changed to, how do we describe it, Nazi grey?
Light grey.
Yes.
Yeah, Wehrmacht grey, I think. Well, before we move on, let's just highlight what's going on here because somebody's clearly firing live ammunition. Well, are they? Because let's remember what the Mail had to say, that when the Kenyans had an exercise in a university, counter-terrorism exercise, then the headline was that petrified students hurtle in a stampede because the Kenyans were using live ammunition. And we pointed out that the round being shown in the Mail picture was clearly a blank. So no bullet, but did it fire? Would it have produced a blast from a muzzle? Yes. When Britain's police get up to the same game, well, there's no problem about it. Well, are we worried about terrorism? Maybe not. Are we worried about the British government? I think we should be. Because if you do not support the Tory government, you are now a terrorist. And this is beginning to come into the public domain. People are beginning to see it. The Independent here pointing out that the London Borough of Camden has been sending out a guidance leaflet to parents. And it says, parents and carers have also been advised by the Safeguarding Children Board in the London Borough of Camden that showing a mistrust of mainstream media reports and a belief in conspiracy theories could be a sign that children are being groomed by extremists. Have a look at the document itself. This is the bit showing the mistrust of mainstream media reports and a belief in conspiracy theories, and you're on the route to being a terrorist. This is what else it said underneath. This is another bullet point. Appearing angry about government policies, especially foreign policy. So if you criticise David Cameron's foreign policy, which is create as many overseas wars as possible, you are clearly on the route to becoming an extremist, a terrorist. We've got a few more. Owning a mobile phone or devices that you haven't given your child, if they've got one of those, they're on the route to becoming a terrorist. Showing sympathy for extremist causes. Is that supporting the UK column?
Possibly.
Possibly. Glorifying violence, accessing extremist literature and imagery, and remember that the definition of that literature is made by David Cameron's government. Out of character changes in dress, behaviour, and changes in their friendship group. Well, surely that would be for Brooks Newmark, who took all his clothes off and made friends with General Idris, who was linked to terrorist organisations.
But sorry, are out of character changes in dress, behaviour and changes in friendship group, is this not a normal part of being a teenager?
It was, but we're now in the post-terrorist age, and of course if you show any of these signs, you're en route to being labelled as a terrorist. So other people have talked about this. So the Independent here saying that academics and writers warned in a letter published in the Independent that the government's counter-terrorism strategy, spearheaded by Prevent, would have a, quote, chilling effect on open debate, free speech and political dissent. And that is the document. If you haven't gone online to read it, you need to download it and really have a think about what this is saying. We're in immensely dangerous times, Mike. David Cameron, bunker mentality, throwing his toys out the pram because he can't start another war.
You're absolutely right, Brian, but I have to admit I'm really struggling not just to burst out laughing at the whole lot of this.
That it's so obvious.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, who's pulling David Cameron's strings? We're definitely going to say the money men, but is it Israel? Well, it's looking highly likely. Well, should we be worried about Britain's police? Just have a look at this one. Nick Gargan, former chief of Avon and Somerset Police, has just been hired by G4S weeks after being found guilty of misconduct. 8 charges of misconduct, and that makes him just the man for G4S. So here's the lady, Victoria Woodison. She's Director of Human Resources for G4S. She says, Nick Gargan's insight and experience will help us support police forces to meet the complex and dynamic challenges they face. Well, we wonder whether that's the dynamic and complex challenges they face in matters to do with misconduct, possibly. So if you're worried about Britain's police, don't worry, because it's going to be privatised by David Cameron. Who is this woman? Let's bring her in, because the paper didn't want to show her. Here she is. And if you have a look at her LinkedIn yourself, we get a very interesting insight into what's really going on, because have a look at this. In these paragraphs, she emphasises again that she's selecting the best people to work with their programmes, including with the police. So we want people who've been involved in misconduct, just the people for G4S. And underneath it, if I can highlight it here, she's saying, or it's being said, that they sponsor the transformation programme leading to the regionalisation and centralisation of finance function. So if that's going on inside G4S, our view is that you've got another clue here that this is about the government's real privatisation and regionalisation agenda for police in England and Wales. Very sinister stuff. Normally, a company should be rejecting people guilty of misconduct. G4S wants them.
Why would that be?
Because G4S must be a corrupt company. I would have thought, Mike, but maybe my analysis is wrong.
I can't imagine. Okay, NATO. Turkey, of course, shot down a Russian plane recently. NATO thinks this was brilliant. So NATO's foreign ministers, they met, this is their statement, they met yesterday in Brussels, and they said that long-standing NATO plans for the defence of Turkey are in place and are kept under active review. In view of the general volatility in the region, these are being further strengthened. We remain determined in a spirit of 28 for 28 to continue developing additional NATO assurance measures, and allies are working to prepare other possible contributions. Of course, this wasn't widely reported in the UK that I saw. It was left to the Germans to report this further. This was originally appeared in Die Welt, and they're basically saying that NATO is strengthening Turkey's air defences. They're saying that they are planning to improve airspace surveillance, air defence. They're providing extra AWACS planes, and they're discussing stationing fighter planes and strengthening anti-aircraft missile systems. And they're saying that this is aimed at early neutralisation of enemy aircraft or missiles. Now, how many enemy aircraft does ISIL have?
I can't answer that question, Mike, but I suspect directly not a lot.
I think it's 0. So therefore, why does Turkey require air defences? This is a direct incitement by NATO on Russia. No question about that.
No question at all. And if we move on to the next piece here, this is another clue as to what's going on. The Express saying that basically Russia is fuming as NATO expands its military alliance with an invitation to ex-Soviet ally. And they're talking about Montenegro, ex-Yugoslav state, which is now going to get rapid acceleration into NATO. And here we see Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO General Secretary, shaking hands with Montenegro's Foreign Minister Igor Lukšić at the NATO HQ. So they're going rapidly down this. The 28-nation US-led group agreed to start the entry process at a meeting with foreign ministers in Brussels this morning. This is all on the move. The move will be seen as a warning to the Kremlin. So they're saying what this is about, that its influence in the region is waning despite a show of strength during last year's annexation of the Crimea and the subsequent bombing campaign in Syria. So this is NATO, belligerent NATO, warning that we are moving right up onto the area of influence of Russia in order to further pressurise Putin and the Russians.
Yes. Yes, and indeed that is the case. Now, a couple of days ago, as we highlighted, George Soros was asked to get out of Russia. His NGOs were asked to get out of Russia. This is how Russia Today reported it. And this is how The Telegraph reported it. George Soros, pro-democracy charity banned in Russia for being a threat to the state. So it's a pro-democracy charity, apparently. So the question is Soros a pro-democracy philanthropist? Well, I don't think so. And in fact, we've highlighted that many times. His Open Society foundations have been key in fomenting regime change right around the world, particularly the colour revolutions. Maybe that's pro-democracy at work, I don't know. Now, to put this into a little bit of context, I'm actually going to blow my own trumpet a little bit, because I wrote this article on my own website before I joined the UK column in 2008. And I said World War III has begun, and I sort of stand by that statement, because Putin is the target of our foreign policy. He has been for many years. And there's a clue, at least one clue in this as to why that is. So I'm just going to read a little bit. It says, in the future, people will look back on the 8th of August 2008 as the day World War III began. Long in the planning, the defeated Lisbon Treaty faction within the EU has been pressing ahead anyway with their policy of destabilisation in the Balkans and the Caucasus. Back in February, when the EU supported the unilateral independence of Kosovo, it was already perfectly clear that the destabilisation would not only touch on the Balkan states, but was also giving the green light to every conceivable separatist movement and minority throughout the world. Just as the war in the Balkans led up to World War I, this ethnically complicated region is serving as a chessboard for EU geopolitical destabilisations, drawing Europe and Russia into conflict with the ultimate aim to subsume Russia into an even more massive European superstate. Yesterday morning, an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council was called at the behest of Russia. The Georgian ambassador stated his position, because this was in the middle of the South Ossetian war. The Georgian ambassador stated his position that Georgia offers South Ossetia autonomy, but along European lines, quote, with international guarantees. This European-style autonomy is the same strategy defined by the Centre for Liberal Studies based in Bulgaria, from where it is argued that the entire region must become a postmodern European order with no nation states. As a result, they say a clash with Russia is inevitable because Russia embodies the nostalgia both for the old European nation state and for a European order organized around the balance of power and non-interference in the domestic affairs of other states. And this is what it's all about. We are into the interference with other nation states. We are into the destruction of national boundaries. And of course, the plan for the EU, as you've mentioned many times, Brian, is that it should be from the Atlantic to the Urals, and Putin is standing in the way of that. And so he has to be removed. Now, Soros has been busy trying to bring that about, and that's why he's been expelled from Russia. But maybe it's okay, because perhaps he's ready for retirement anyway. And we have a successor in the wings, none other than Mark Zuckerberg, our great leader, if we're all on Facebook anyway. And of course, he has launched a new foundation sort of thing, named after his wife, as you do.
As you do.
Yeah. So let's just have a look at some of the things that he's saying. Our hopes for your, he's talking a letter to his daughter. Our hopes for your generation focus on two ideas: advancing human potential and promoting equality. Advancing human potential is about pushing the boundaries of how great a human life can be. Can you learn and experience 100 times more than we do today? So this is kind of hinting at transhumanism a little bit. And so it goes on. The usual things that he's talking about, poverty, hunger, healthcare. It's basically the same agenda that Soros has been talking about for 20 years, that Bill and Melinda Gates have been talking about for a decade. And they've been spending billions and billions on their various philanthropic works. And yet nothing appears to get better in the world. In fact, it's only the opposite. So Mark Zuckerberg joining the philanthropist club, putting something like $40 or $50 billion into exactly the same type of operation that George Soros has been running for a few decades.
This is the Global Change Program,
Indeed.
Running a network of agent provocateurs, basically. Is he over 16, that man? Just looking at the photograph, Mike.
Well,
I think he might have been naughty, but...
He is.
Right.
Yeah, he is.
So we've got to have a bit of humour, because otherwise the news, particularly today, would just be too bad.
Right.
Could it get blacker? That's the best I could do to introduce this one.
Yes, well, yes, indeed. Right. Because obviously the big news that isn't being covered terribly much in the media because of what's going on in Parliament today is the continuation of the COP21 business in Paris, where of course we all have to switch off electricity because the world's going to end if we don't. And the backlash is starting now. India absolutely leading the charge because they're determined to push forward with coal. They've got large coal resources. They need proper energy generation capability, and they recognize that solar and wind power cannot provide them with that. They're not saying they're not going to invest in these technologies. They're simply saying that for the next period of time, they've got to push forward with coal. And so they have issued this comment from the chief economic advisor to the Modi government. And he is saying that in the run-up to the conference, there is a growing call, first articulated clearly at this year's summit of the Group of Seven, to phase out fossil fuels. The United States and others have also vowed to vote against fossil fuel energy projects in developing countries where multilateral development banks are voting on them. For India, a country struggling to provide basic electricity to about 25% of the population, this smacks of carbon imperialism. And such imperialism on the part of advanced nations could spell disaster for India and other developing countries. So he goes on. I mean, this is absolutely on the money. And it's being covered by many other people as well with similar types of things. So this is Tom Weissmuller. He's saying there is no planetary climate threat here. That's what he's saying. And he's saying that if all the proposals that are put before the COP21 were to be adopted, humankind would be thrown back to the Stone Age. He said so that's basically his point, and it's an absolutely valid point. And another example this time from the climate change science. This is Climate Change Science and Climate Change Scare. This is a South African engineer. So we've got India, South Africa, and a bunch of other developing nations really sort of pushing back on this. We've got to keep this in the context of the comments that were made right at the very beginning of the conference, where they're basically saying you will accept this global governance that we're putting on the back of the climate change agenda, or else, really was what was the message that was really pretty firmly being sent.
Well, the bankers are going to solve it, Mike, anyway.
Well, apparently, because it's all good news. It is all good news because this is the Bank of England. This is hot on the heels of their open forum, which took place a couple of weeks ago, where they tried to convince us that we should all trust the markets. Well, they've got more good news for us, because apparently the post-financial crisis is now over, so that's good. They can now draw a line under the era of bank bashing, according to the FT, and the Bank of England is saying it has no desire for new capital buffers that would seek to use powers to strengthen lenders in good times rather than to tame them in the credit cycle. And that is basically John Cunliffe, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. He gave an interview to the Financial Times, and he said exactly that they're now seeking to use regulation to strengthen lenders in good times. And I just thought that was quite similar rhetoric to the rhetoric that George Osborne has been using recently, which is the whole idea of fixing the roof while the sun shines. It's quite similar rhetoric, and so I'm wondering, do they have the same scriptwriter? Perhaps they do. So anyway, it's all good, all fixed, no more danger in the financial system because the banks are setting extra money aside, and it's all great, or is it? Because Activist Post here pointing out that the 10 of the biggest Wall Street banks are now facing legal action for price fixing in the derivatives market. This is a class action lawsuit which is being taken against a whole bunch of banks, and they're saying, the lawsuit says that the banks have been able to extract billions of dollars in monopoly rents year after year from class members in this case. So that's people in the class action suit. Reuters said the class action suit has been filed against Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Credit Suisse, Barclays PLC, BNP Paribas, UBS, Deutsche Bank, and the Royal Bank of Scotland, and they're being accused of colluding to prevent the trading of interest rate swaps on electronic exchanges. Now, at the end of the day, I'm not suggesting that it's a good thing necessarily to be trading interest rate swaps on electronic exchanges, and I'm certainly not suggesting that it's a good thing that these types of financial products should be available to retail investors, which is what this lawsuit is really about. But nonetheless, what this article absolutely highlights is our assertion. We've been making this assertion for a long, long time now, that the financial system is a cartel. There is no competition, and that list of banks all operating together to push a certain group of people out of the market, that is a cartel. Now, I've highlighted this cartel in the past, which is the Inter-Alpha group of banks. This, of course, this graphic is a little out of date now because Barings doesn't exist anymore. But nonetheless, this is another cartel established by the Rothschilds 40 years ago. This is how the banks operate, no competition, and
create money from nothing.
It's a closed shop.
Yeah, we will be staying on the subject in forthcoming news programmes, but of course the Bradbury is now the elephant in the room. The Bradbury pound, Labour Party very squeamish about talking about it, even though they were happy to support the early day motion. So the solution to all of this criminal banking nonsense, the reissuing of our own currency as credit, as happened with the Bradbury pound, could be brought in tomorrow. We could have this cleared up in 6 months. Well, to leave you on something cheerful after some pretty gloomy news today, this was sent through, thank you Alex, I think sent this one through to us, the Scottish Review, where this gentleman was commenting on creative and being creative. He says, I sometimes think there is actually a fear of the arts because they might allow too many people to find their individual voices, and that might be seen as disruptive and dangerous, a threat to the smooth running of the school as an institution and even society as a whole. That may explain why governments now try to refocus creativity in economic terms, stressing the value of creative industries with an emphasis on partnership and teamwork. the lone dissenting individual voice is not appreciated in the commercial world. I decided to put this one in because I think this man is spot on. But what he's really showing us is another big weapon in dealing with the politics that we are being subjected to. And yes, what are the Camerons of this world frightened of? Of course, they're frightened of individuals speaking up and creating the right sort of environment, a loving, caring environment, instead of more war. So have a look at the Scottish Review and read that one for yourself. And then we'll just say on a black human note that we, even though we've used some of their articles today, we just had to give the Express an award. So the good news is that the Daily Express has won the UK column Dross and Propaganda Award for the best mix of fear, perverted sex and terrorism. Well, let's have a look. Top left, we've got a huge vegetable competition. I think we get we can understand that pretty quickly. We've got a mum facing jail. That's all parental fear. We've got the shocking moment, a supermarket customer hacks employees. Good bit of violence, and it looks a little bit jihadi, that one, doesn't it? What else have we got? We should also be fearful of storms, and a woman who gave water to dehydrated pigs, presumably going for slaughter. Well, she's in big trouble. Can't have compassion. That's extremely naughty. Well, here we've got outrage as shop tells customers to rape us. So we've brought in a bit of rape, a bit more of fear for the family. Mum faces jail. And then a pretty outrageous claim here that a desperate ISIS has moved its headquarters to Libya after airstrikes have blitzed its Raqqa stronghold. Do you reckon they've moved to Libya? I thought Libya was in a bit of a state after Cameron's been at that one as well. Well, there we are, a nice mix of rape, families and jihadism. We've got the Turkish president threatening to resign over the ISIS oil trade claims, but we haven't actually seen him properly refute those, so that'll be interesting to watch. Well, where do we go from here? Fear. We're back on fear because the US Navy has equipped 5 more of its destroyer ships with Aegis, which is a terrifying weapon, which we should be terrified of. And if you're not terrified of the Americans, then you should be terrified that ISIS is living in the Matrix. And there's some cheeky real photos mixed in there as well. Then we got the fattest child in the world, clearly an important part of news today. And if you're not worried about getting grossly fat and overweight as a young child, then you should be frightened of ISIS. And ISIS crippled as 2/3 of the oil revenues wiped out by the US. I thought the Russians had done that, Mike.
Indeed.
I was probably distracted by the perverted sex. And then the bad news is that Santa Claus, I think he's known, he's called Father Christmas here, but he's been delayed because of the security alert. So poor children in presumably Holland and other lowland countries are not going to see Santa Claus as he's known because of those nasty Schengen border controls. Well, take your pick out of that, but well done, Daily Express. We think this is nudging people into dissonance because what do you focus on? The serious items of war and destruction or the sheer dross. But maybe it was carefully planned. It wasn't an accident. So thank you for that. We're going to end by saying a very big thank you to Mr. Hall for his support. We'd be delighted to speak to you in person, but unfortunately we can't. But thank you very much. And we unfortunately will not be here tomorrow or Friday. We have to be on the road for some important business. We'll be back on Monday and, of course, catching up with everything that's happened in Parliament today. Dark times. Don't be gloomy. Don't sit at home moping. Get out there speaking to people. Action conquers fear. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.